For this assignment, I will be addressing research regarding test-enhanced learning by Roediger and Karpik. To start with, the study aims to investigate the testing effect, and so the research question at hand is, what is the evidence to support the testing effect which claims that if people are tested on material, then they will have a higher chance of recall at a later time than if they were not tested? Thus, the researchers aim to investigate the testing effect under relevant conditions using prose materials and to determine whether testing facilitates learning more efficiently than restudying. Furthermore, the researchers hypothesized that immediate retention tests would increase with the number of study opportunities because of short-term benefits. However, taking tests after a slight delay would overall increase long-term retention more than just repeatedly studying the material. The subjects were 120 Washington University undergraduate students who were between the ages of 18 to 24. Additionally, the stimuli was two prose passages from the reading comprehension section of a test preparation booklet for the TOEFLs called The Sun and Sea Otters. These passages were divided into 30 idea units for scoring purposes. There were two experiments which had the same stimuli. However, the second experiment also had a questionnaire. The three conditions were asked to rate the passages based on how interesting and readable they found it and how confident they were that they would remember it within a week. We found out that subjects in the study-only condition rated the passage as less interesting than the other two conditions, and they were more confident that they would remember the passage in 1 week compared to the other two conditions. The groups agreed on the readability. Regarding the types of trials, as mentioned above, there were two experiments. The first experiment had the participants either take one test between studying and the final test, or not be tested and only study it 5 minutes, 2 days, or 1 week before taking their final and only test. On the other hand, the second experiment had three conditions. The students either studied the passage 4 times, studied the passage 3 times and took one test, or studied the passage once and took 3 tests. In order to correctly demonstrate one trial, I will be providing visual aid on the screen. In the second experiment, students had one passage, like this one, to study during 4 5-minute consecutive periods. In the first condition, the subject was study this passage for all these 4 slabs of time. In the second condition, the subject would study this passage 3 times and take one test. And lastly, the students would study the passage once and take 3 tests. The following section will provide more insight into the trials and conditions. This section addresses the overall procedure of this study. The first experiment was a 2x3 mixed factorial design. The learning conditions were to restudy without taking a test or to be tested. Then, the delay of the final test was either 5 minutes, 2 days, or 1 week, which were the retention intervals. The subjects were tested during 2 sessions in small groups, with 4 people or fewer, and this experiment had 2 phases. The first phase was 4 7-minute periods where they could be asked to study one passage for the first time, restudy one of the passages, or take a recall test over one of the passages. During testing periods, subjects were given a test sheet with the title of the passage and were asked to write down as much of the material from the passage as they could recall. After this, they moved on to the second phase, which happened after a 5-minute, 2-day, or 1 week retention interval. Here, the participants were asked to recall the passages that they had learned in phase 1. Additionally, the second experiment employed a 3x2 between subjects design. The researchers examined the effects of repeated versus single tests. These experiments demonstrated a pattern of results. In the first experiment, subjects' recall responses were scored by awarding 1 point for each of the correctly recalled idea units out of 30. In the initial test, subjects recalled 20.9 idea units, which was around 70% of the passage. In the final test, for 5-minute intervals, subjects who had studied the passage twice recalled more than those who had studied once and taken a recall test. This is likely on account of short-term memory. However, this was reversed for both delayed tests. Here, the participants who took an initial test had recalled more than subjects who had only studied the passages. Moreover, these results were submitted to a 2x3 ANOVA. A main effect was seen with testing versus restudying, which indicates that overall, initial testing produces better final recall than restudying. There was also a main effect of retention interval indicating that forgetting occurred as the retention interval grew longer. However, these main effects were qualified by a significant learning condition and retention interval interaction. This indicates that restudying produced a better performance on the 5-minute test. However, testing produced better performance on the 2-day and 1-week test. Similarly, post hoc analyses confirmed that on the 5-minute retention test, restudying actually produced better recall than testing. However, the opposite patterns of results was observed on the delayed retention tests. After 2 days, the initially tested group recalled more than the additional study group, which was 68% versus 54%, and after 1 week, the tested group recalled 56% of the material, whereas the restudy group only recalled 42%. Likewise, in the second experiment, subjects in the 1 study and 3 test condition recalled 20.9, 21.2, and 21.1 idea units on each of the 3 tests, which is around 70% of the passage. However, subjects in the 3 study and 1 test condition recalled 23.1 units, which is around 77% of the passage on their initial recall test. Furthermore, the pattern of final test scores replicates the pattern of results found in the first experiment. For example, with the 5-minute test group, their recall was correlated with repeated studying at 83%, compared to the group that did 1 test who only recalled 78%, which, compared to the 3 test group, only recalled 71%. However, with the delayed test after 1 week, recall was correlated with the number of tests given earlier. Therefore, the 3 test group recalled more than the 1 test group, which meant they recalled 61% versus 56%. And lastly, the only study group recalled only 40% after 1 week. These results were also submitted to a 2x3 ANOVA. This showed a main effective retention interval, indicating that forgetting had occurred, and so the effect of the learning condition was only marginally significant. Additionally, these effects were qualified by a learning condition and retention interval interaction. This indicates that repeated studying produced short-term benefits, whereas repeated testing produced greater benefits on the delayed test or long-term retention. This was supported by the post hoc analyses, which showed greater forgetting in the pure study condition than with the testing. Another aspect of the procedure was the use of the alternative approach using a proportional measure. This graph indicates the proportional measure of forgetting. This shows us that the subjects in the pure study condition forgot around 52% more than those who were tested once, who forgot only 28% compared to those who were tested thrice, only forgot 14%. After all this testing, with the first experiment, the researchers concluded that compared to testing, additional studying helped performance on immediate retention tests, but prior testing improved performance on delayed tests. According to the second experiment, students in the repeated testing condition at 61% recalled much more after a week than students in the repeated study condition at 40%. Therefore, testing has a strong long-term retention. On the other hand, just as with the first experiment, repeated studying improved performance when they were given 5 minutes before the final test than when there was a delay. Therefore, the researchers claim that testing is a skill that only practice can enhance, and so it improves the performance after a delay. For the second part of this assignment, I would like to address a study done by Frank Leeming titled The Exam-a-Day Procedure Improves Performance in Psychology Classes. This is placed in a different context, but it considers a similar hypothesis, that testing enhances learning. However, Leeming did it on a longitudinal basis and with course material instead of a simpler reading comprehension. Furthermore, Leeming also provides insight into long-term retention over the duration of a semester or a course, which further supports Roediger and Karpik's research, which ended at 1 week for both the experiments. Moreover, his results show that the degree of ease of the material does not play a factor into retention when frequent testing occurs. This article illustrates how long-term retention occurs based on the fact that the students inevitably study regularly, as mentioned by Roediger and Kirpik, instead of right before an exam. Thus, since the students are tested repeatedly, Leeming claims that average semester percentages in 2 courses were more than half a letter grade higher. Students who gave daily exams performed better than those who tested infrequently on the same set of questions. Students from his exam-a-day course had higher absolute scores than those in traditional classes. All the concepts mentioned above are strongly tied to numerous aspects of cognitive psychology. For instance, we understand that memory is an extremely complex phenomenon with numerous steps and mechanisms involved. It involves explicit memory, which is all the information we consciously aim to store and be able to later retrieve, as done by the subjects in this study. Implicit memory is when we learn without being aware that we are doing so. Additionally, one of the reasons that long term memory is enhanced through testing is because we are asking ourselves to retrieve the information in a similar test setting. According to Atkinson and Shiffin's modal memory model, we know that rehearsal is crucial in laying the foundation for long term memory. Furthermore, we know that the prefrontal cortex combines sensory information and long term memory. Lastly, the findings from the article support that the testing enhances long-term memory. Therefore, I chose to test this for my sociology course. Prior to reading this article, I had one midterm where I restudied the material around 3 times and got an 11.5 out of 15 or 76.6%. However, after reading this article, I had one more midterm and I decided to test myself using past questions and end of chapter questions while I only studied once. The second time, I felt a little less confident than usual since I felt like I did not study enough. However, I received a 13.5 out of 15 or 90% for the second midterm. This therefore demonstrates that the findings in this article can be related and seen in my life. These are the references and sources that were used to put together this assignment. Thank you for listening.